The other thing is that Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, is considered to be the author of these COVID-19 policies. He wants a precedent-breaking third term as General Secretary of the Communist Party, and he feels that any criticism of this zero COVID policy of his, or indeed any adjustment of it, undermines his ability to get that third term.
Joining us now is the author of The Coming Collapse of China, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good to see you.
Good to see you, Doug. Thank you.
I'd like to start with this fresh news out of China, the big story, which I don't think is getting nearly enough coverage. It's the lockdowns, the COVID-19 lockdowns happening in Shanghai, a city of over 20 million people. These are draconian lockdowns. We've all seen the images of people howling from their balconies in high-rise apartment buildings, the robot dogs, robot drones, which are ordering people to stay inside with facial recognition technology so they can identify them. Their pets being rounded up into mesh bags for euthanasia. It's a dystopian future almost.
This shows that China's not authoritarian anymore. It really is semi-totalitarian, maybe even full-on totalitarian, because of the lockdown in Shanghai, which is like 25.1 million people, is actually more strict than what we saw in Xi'an or Wuhan before that. These are people who are confined to their homes. For the most part, they can't go out for food, medicine, daily necessities. And although there has been in the last couple of days some loosening of restrictions, the adjustments are really extremely minor. So China is involved in this massive social control experiment, and it's not working out well for the country or for the people involved.
Well, what's prompting this? This variant, which they're experiencing, is not all that bad, certainly no worse than the Wuhan lockdown. Why are we seeing this? Does this demonstrate something else in the Chinese government mentality?
That's a really important question, and the answer is yes. A couple of things. First of all, the Communist Party has based its legitimacy on the ability to control this disease. And this is, we go back to February or March of 2020, where they were criticizing democracy in general and our democracy in particular for not being able to deal with COVID-19. Now we've gotten past it, and China is in the middle of it. And so therefore, they see this as a test of the Communist Party, and it's critical to their survival. The other thing is that Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, is considered to be the author of these COVID-19 policies. He wants a precedent-breaking third term as General Secretary of the Communist Party, and he feels that any criticism of this zero COVID policy of his, or indeed any adjustment of it, undermines his ability to get that third term.
You told me just moments ago that we're going to be experiencing the effects of this Shanghai lockdown. How so?
There are supply chain disruptions. So, for instance, a week ago, cargo volume at the Shanghai port, which is the world's largest, was down 40%. Now it's probably down even more. Air cargo through the Pudong airport is down 97%. And by the way, China can't ship what it doesn't produce, and its factories are producing at either very low capacities or they're shut altogether. So Americans are going to feel this in a month or so, and it's going to add to our inflation problem, which is already serious.
That brings me to the title of your book, The Coming Collapse of China. How precarious is China's economy in the face of these lockdowns and other factors?
Yeah, the most important of those other factors is the debt crisis, because China has debt perhaps as much as 350% of its gross domestic product, maybe more. Right now, China has a stagnant economy. It's not growing nearly as fast as reported, which means that China is not producing the output in which to service this debt. Last year, China claimed an 8.1% increase in gross domestic product, but we saw a noticeable slowing down of the Chinese economy towards the end of last year. And certainly for the first several months of this year, March was perhaps a month where the Chinese economy actually shrank.
True confession here, full confession here, I'm skeptical of a quote-unquote collapse of China because, here's why, they have a callous disregard for humanity, for people. They can sacrifice their people. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I thought the Communist Party would have fallen long by now, so I can certainly agree with you on that. But what we have witnessed recently in Shanghai is because of this callous disregard, this creating antagonism in society. We've seen the frustration, we've seen suicides, murder-suicides, people streaming out in the streets in defiance of rules. Now, most of the time, the Communist Party is able to deal with this, but there have been points in Chinese history where totalitarian rulers have fallen because they have not listened to people. And because they've got the power, they generally tend not to listen. And they've become tone deaf right now in the Communist Party in dealing with the problems in Shanghai and in other locations.
So what form does that collapse take? If you could envision a collapse of the People's Republic of China and the government within, how would it take shape?
So I sort of view it as a failure of the Communist Party falling from power. And obviously that hasn't happened yet. But I believe that the party doesn't have the tools right now to deal with the problems it faces, because it's not just the COVID lockdowns, not just the debt crisis and a stagnant economy. They've got worsening food shortages, a deteriorating environment, and a lot of unhappy people. Now, they can hold on then they have held on longer than I thought. But this is a system which is, I think, headed to failure because it's not able to deal with the challenges that China obviously faces, and the Chinese people know that.
In the interim, does that make China more dangerous on the world stage?
Absolutely. And there are a number of factors that are coinciding. One of them is I believe that Chinese leaders see a closing window of opportunity to achieve what they believe are historic goals. And at the same time, you have a leader which right now, he's grabbed a lot of power from everybody, but that means that he has accountability, total accountability. And I think he has a low threshold of risk as he sees that he's being criticized from all sides. And although we don't know the full dimensions of this, we do know that there is intense infighting at the top of the Communist Party. And especially as Xi Jinping is in this campaign season of sorts, it means that he can do things that would take us by surprise, because we're not calculating, we calculate his interests differently than he does. And that's inherently a risky situation.
I'm struck by what I think is a stunning level of naivete on the part of the U.S. towards China. We see this with this Eco-Health Alliance and the U.S. government, the NIH helping to fund research at the Wuhan lab. Was that a bad idea, or was it in the best interests of international cooperation?
This was an extremely bad idea, and COVID-19 is one of the results of this. You know, Dr. Fauci, the head of the one of the units at the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, he actually was funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He denied that in his response to questions from Senator Rand Paul last year. But there are two papers, one published in 2016 and the other in 2017, I believe, from researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology describing gain-of-function research. And guess what? Those papers specifically acknowledge funding from Dr. Fauci's Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. So either Fauci was committing perjury or he didn't know what he was funding. But yes, we have funded this, and this does look like a biological weapons program. So we have been helping them develop the pathogens that could one day be used to kill Americans and others.
That's the first time I've heard that from a responsible, knowledgeable person like yourself. Do you think that this virus was indeed weaponized for release, or was the release accidental?
I believe that we don't know 100%, Doug, where SARS-CoV-2, the pathogen causing COVID-19, came from. But the explanations of a zoonotic transfer, I think, are very thin. I think it's much more likely that this did escape from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I think it was accidental. If you talk to a number of people in China and Chinese nationals in the U.S. or people who were once from China, they actually think that it was purposeful. But whatever it is, Doug, there's one thing that we know 100%, that once this disease got out into China, Xi Jinping took two decisions, actually more, but two decisions that meant that he deliberately spread this beyond China's borders. He lied about contagiousness. He knew this was highly transmissible human to human, but he told the world it was not. And he did that for weeks. And at the same time, while he was locking down his own country, he was pressuring other countries, including the U.S., to take arrivals from China without travel restrictions or quarantines. And it were those passengers and arrivals who made a disease which should have been confined to the central part of China around Wuhan and turned it into a global pandemic.
Gordon, I don't want to let you go without asking you about Taiwan. Do you expect People's Republic invasion of Taiwan, and what should the United States do about it or to prevent it?
I don't expect an invasion this year because this is a point where Chinese leaders are preoccupied by a leadership struggle. But after that struggle is settled, I'm very concerned. You know, there are a lot of reasons why China wouldn't invade Taiwan, but we have seen Russia, for instance, and there were a lot of reasons for Russia not to invade Ukraine, but it did. There was a failure of deterrence, and we could see a similar failure on the part of Taiwan. So, yeah, I'm very concerned. And what we should do is we should basically say, we will defend Taiwan, say that in public, make it clear, offer Taiwan a mutual defense treaty if it wants it, and also start sending weapons there. We've been sending weapons to Ukraine after the invasion. That's what we should do, but we should have sent them a lot earlier. So we shouldn't make the same mistake with regard to Taiwan.
We've learned our lesson. Gordon Chang, I could continue this conversation all day long. Really appreciate your time. We would love to have you back. Please come back.
I certainly will, and thank you so much, Doug.